Okay, just starting a couple minutes early. Uh, hey, Miss Little TJ Baja, glad you could make it. I wasn't sure who would show up on the 4th of July, but I'm here. Boxy's here. I was looking for some patriotic bunting for Andre. Glad you could make it. I was looking for a little patriotic decoration for Boxy here for the 4th of July, but I couldn't. Hey, Allie, glad you could make it. Welcome. This is fun. It's going to be a good session. I'm gonna wait until 10 on the nose to spins and needles. Thank you. Uh, Before we get going and get people a, uh, a minute or so to show up, and then we'll have fun. Glad everybody could make it. Welcome. Um, this is going to be. I have lots of questions. I'm gonna alternate between a live question and questions that people have mailed in. So that'll be fun. And also, I have chat on slow for a number of reasons. Early on, a Steve Hodel person showed up. So I'm going to kind of slow things down and whatnot. All good behavior here. Okay, one more minute. Lou Duva. Okay, is that high? Great. Um, Welcome. Okay, 10 o'clock. So here we are, and welcome on this. Welcome on the 4th of July. It has been kind of cool and cloudy here in Los Angeles, although it's sunning up, so it may get warm later. But I am in my interview outfit, the same shirt as always. Helen, oh Helen, great, glad you could make it. Um, so here we go. Bia, oh hey, Bia from Spain. Thank you. Glad you could make it. Yeah, this is going to be a good session. I'm Larry Harnisch. This is Boxy. Boxy is the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files in the Black Dahlia case. People say a lot of things about what's in here, mainly because they know the average person doesn't have a box of this stuff, and it's not true. Um, so that's the introduction to Boxy. I started doing the Ask Me Anythings. They're always on the first Tuesday of the month. Why? I got really tired of the low quality of true crime TV shows and podcasts. In fact, I just turned down a show last week. It was the third request from this show. I think it's called Decoding Mysteries. And Ashley, thank you. I just said, I really, the last 4 or 5 true crime shows I was in, I was really unhappy with them, to say the least. And it's like, I don't want to do them anymore. And the same thing with the podcast. It's just, so this is my alternative to that. And so anyway, that's by way of introduction. Steve Hodel people, if there are any Steve Hodel people, stick around. You might actually learn something about the Black Dahlia case. P.U. Eatwell people, welcome. Stick around. You may learn something about the Black Dahlia case. P.U. Eatwell had access to these files and really ignored a lot of them. Very, very strange about that. The John Gilmore people. Oh, John Gilmore. Who is John Gilmore? John Gilmore wrote this book. This is a very bad book. If you read this, you will have to unlearn everything and your head will explode. So don't read this book. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Update on the book. I'm doing Elizabeth Short in the last month of her life down in San Diego in December of 1946. My research this month has been about the situation of that Elizabeth Short would have faced at the time. In terms of homicide, there were very few homicides in San Diego in 1946. There were only 4. But nonetheless, it was a very tough situation in terms of housing. Um, Women who were like Elizabeth Short, who showed up in San Diego with no place to live, no money, and no job, they often got shipped home. There was a sort of a shelter run by the Big Sisters, but a lot of times those were for uh, women with children, wives of servicemen, because of course San Diego was a big Navy base, and so they had a lot of wives of men and Navy sailors, and there would be shelter was it was tough for them to find a place to live. As a matter of fact, you will find that after the war, an entire military base was just stripped bare for housing supplies. Just every board, every nail, every building gone. It's pretty impressive what the Greatest Generation did after the war. So that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. Um, if you remember from last time, where is Steve Hodel? Steve Hodel, someone mentioned, hey, Steve Hodel hasn't posted on his blog in a while. And Steve Hodel is someone who needs constant reaffirmation. He needs to constantly find new clues and more evidence and more clues and more evidence. And so he hadn't posted for a month or something like that. And people were kind of wondering what's going on with Steve Hodel. Well, Steve surfaced to do a podcast with Ralph Pizzullo. And Ralph was Steve's co-author on Most Evil. And I was going to do a reaction podcast, and gee whiz, Steve says exactly the same thing. He has the script. Nobody ever challenges him. But I have to say, Ralph is probably the worst, probably the worst interview and there aren't really any good interviews with Steve Hodel. Because he says the same thing. And he rambles and whatnot. Anyway, so Steve Hodel is still with us and did this podcast. Now, there's one thing I want to mention before we get going is Wikipedia. Want to talk about Wikipedia? Somebody went in, and I only read Wikipedia for amusement. I never ever intervene with that for a number of reasons. But somebody went into the Wikipedia article on Elizabeth Short and added a bunch of information about her sisters. Okay, don't do that. Okay, her sisters, her family have absolutely nothing to do with her murder. They have suffered enough. Don't identify them because there's always some stalker or ghoulish curiosity seeker who will want to contact them. Okay, they don't want to be contacted. They don't want to talk to the public, and it's kind of a hard concept to get that Elizabeth Short's family doesn't want to talk about it, but they don't. They want to be left alone. The thing that would make them the happiest of all is if everybody just went away and forgot about it. That's what they would like. So don't do that. Do not out Elizabeth Short's family. Don't do that. Okay, so let's see. Getting to the questions here. I'm going to try to alternate between live questions and emailed questions. I have a lot of emailed questions. I may not get to them all. If not, leave them in the comments. I'll try to make a note of them and get them to next time. As a matter of fact, I was going through last month's chat, and I noticed that somebody had asked about Patrick O'Reilly, and I missed the question at the time. I'm sorry about that, but I want to talk about who is Patrick O'Reilly and how do we get his name and how do we even know about him? Okay, Patrick O'Reilly is on a list that Frank Jemison, who was the investigator for the district attorney's office, compiled. Frank Jemison compiled a list of suspects. Some of them are named, some of them are very vague. If you go through that list, you will find Sergeant Chuck. You will find queer women surgeon. You will find Madam Chang. Okay. Patrick O'Reilly is on that list, and that's where he comes from. Now, why would they look at Patrick O'Reilly? Patrick O'Reilly was accused of a sex crime. And so they looked at in the process of investigating the Black Dahlia case, they knew that whoever cut her in half had surgical training. They knew that. And so they looked at anybody with medical training who had been accused of a sex crime. That's how George Hodel got dragged into the Black Dahlia case. Okay. So, hey, Jeffrey, welcome. Patrick O'Reilly was accused of abusing, it was his telephone operator. O'Reilly was an osteopath. Okay. And I should mention that the view of osteopaths until relatively recently was they were sort of second-class medical practitioners. In the 40s, really into the 70s and later, osteopaths were kind of, in terms of the medical profession, the MD doctors would look down on them as like, well, they're almost chiropractors. You go to a clinic today, you might be seen by an osteopath, but that wasn't like that in the 40s. And so O'Reilly was an osteopath. He ran, I believe, a sanitarium in Glendale. And his surgical training, I don't know. But I mean, the first question you have to look at with any suspect is, was there a connection to Elizabeth Short? Did they know each other? O'Reilly, no. Okay. Did he have a connection to the crime scene? Again, no. Okay. Did he have the skill to do what was done in terms of cutting Elizabeth Short in half? Doubtful. We don't know for sure because we don't know. Without a lot more digging, it's a little unclear what his medical training is. But we've already, by looking at, he had no connection to Elizabeth Short. He didn't have any connection to the crime scene, so we can pretty much eliminate him. And the thing I will say, you can find that list on Wikipedia, and it might be on Black Dahlia in Hollywood. I don't know. I stay out of Black Dahlia in Hollywood. But people treat it like a game of Clue. It has to be, Colonel Mustard in the conservatory with a wrench. Okay. In real life, maybe Colonel Mustard had a connection to Miss Scarlet. Maybe not. Maybe they never met. So in reality, it's not a game of Clue. So that's kind of my spiel on Patrick O'Reilly. He's a diversion, and it's really not worth time chasing it. Okay. Helen, why did Elizabeth Short not return home if she was having trouble finding a job or an apartment? I always thought she was only holidaying to warmer weather because of her bad lungs. Yes and no. Going home was never an option for Elizabeth Short. If you recall, in her life, in I think it was October of 1946, she and her sidekick Margie Graham had landed. They had lived with Mark Hansen. He threw them out because of Margie's drinking. So he threw them out, and Margie and Elizabeth Short crashed with a couple of guys named Bill Robinson and Marvin Margolis. And they stayed with those guys about maybe 10 days, something like that. And then Bill Robinson's aunt and uncle were like apartment managers, and they were afraid that they were going to get kicked out because there was a housing shortage in LA after World War II. They were afraid they were going to get kicked out of the apartment. And so they told Margie and Elizabeth Short, time to go. And so Margie Graham went home. She said, I've had it with LA. I'm going to go back to Cambridge. And she did. Elizabeth Short did not do that. Going home was never an option for her, whether it was health purposes or whatever. Medford wasn't really home to her. If she lived there off and on, but it's kind of misleading to say it was a home. She got sent back to Medford after she was arrested in Santa Barbara for underage drinking. And she stayed there for a while and then went down to Florida. She was very nomadic. So really going home was never an option. So Margie went back to Cambridge. Elizabeth Short stayed in Los Angeles. She went back and lived with Mark Hansen for a while. And then she got booted out of there and lived in an apartment for a while that Ann Toth got her. It was this sort of it was the place on Cherokee where the young women were paying $1 a night for a bunk bed. And so Elizabeth Short did that for a while, and she came up with this story about I'm going to go up to the Bay Area and spend, because it was Christmas time, I'm going to go spend the holidays with my sister Virginia. Okay, not really. And so Elizabeth Short went down to San Diego for about a month, and it was going home. Helen, the short answer is going home was never an option for whatever reason, and that, as much as we can get into the head of the mindset of Elizabeth Short, it wasn't an option. Going home was not something that she wanted to do. She said she would rather stay in California, and so she did. Okay. So let's see. Let me go back to one of the questions the emailed questions. This was from YouTube. What is it with that Hodel photo purporting to show cigarette burns on the back of Elizabeth Short? I know she had moles on her back, but the marks don't look at all like moles. Any idea? Okay. The cigarette burns on Elizabeth Short. Okay. Was Elizabeth Short burned with cigarettes? No. Where did the story come from? About a month or two after Elizabeth Short was killed, there was a young woman who ran away from home. And she eventually decided, well, maybe I don't want to run away from home. Maybe I want to go back home. And so she claimed that she was kidnapped by a guy who said, well, I'm going to do to you what I did to the Black Dahlia. And so she burned herself with she burned herself with cigarettes. And that's kind of where the cigarette burn story comes from. In reality, no. There aren't a lot of photographs of her back. There are some morgue shots of that. As for what Steve Hodel says, I don't know. Steve is at this point, Steve Hodel has kind of created his own alternative reality. And he's gotten some stuff from Severed, which is a terrible place to be. But and I'll get into more in Severed later on. But it's like, no, there really aren't any cigarette burns. So no. Okay. Spins and needles. Are the Elizabeth Short possessions and envelope that were sent to the LAPD still in evidence? Were any items returned to the family? That's a great question. What Spins and Needles is talking about is after Elizabeth Short was killed, the killer took some items from her purse and doused everything or dampened everything with solvent of some sort, and addressed this little envelope in cutout letters from the paper and mailed it to the Los Angeles Examiner and other newspapers. And so it went into the mail, and it was caught when they were sorting the mail, and they called the police to come investigate it, which they did. Because it was addressed to the newspapers, the Postmaster General decided, hey, yeah, we need to show it to the police. But we need it. It is addressed to the newspapers. So by law, by postal regulations, we need to contact the papers and tell them because this is addressed to them. So the papers were contacted. And so you see these photographs of the envelope and all the stuff that was inside. And what was inside was, let's see, it was her birth certificate. It was her address book, so-called address book. It was business cards, snapshots, all that kind of thing. Okay. Where is that stuff now? Great question. The envelope was examined for fingerprints. And my best recollection, my best guess is that they pretty much took like the letters, the newspaper clippings off the envelope to see if, well, are there any fingerprints on it or anything like that? As for the contents, it's unclear, but it's a very small envelope. My guess is it would be there's a file cabinet in robbery homicide, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. I have seen the file cabinet. I was never allowed to like dig through it, but there is a file cabinet. It is full of stuff, regardless of what you may hear. And my guess is it's there. Some of it might have been because it was all tested by the LAPD crime lab. And so some of it went to the LAPD crime lab. Some material was sent to the FBI because the FBI had a more sophisticated crime lab for 1947 than the LAPD. And so the FBI crime lab analyzed some material. If you go through the FBI file, and you have to be very careful with that, you'll see that they analyzed material from that was recovered from her body. Elizabeth Short was scrubbed with a scrub brush, and so they found little fibers from this scrub brush that had been used on her, and so they took these fibers and sent them to the FBI for analysis. So that's done. Let's see, Andre. Yeah, he might have said that. I don't know. There's so many documentaries. They might have gone to the lab for processing. It's entirely possible that at least some of the material was sent to the FBI crime lab for analysis. But beyond that, I don't know. There wasn't a lot in there. Okay. Let's see here. Let me do, okay, from Instagram. This is real fast. What's your take on Maryland? Okay, I don't do Maryland. I only do the Black Dahlia. I'm a specialist. I don't do Marilyn Monroe. I don't do Sal Mineo. I don't do any of that stuff. Okay, let's see here. The books is that, okay. I want to distinguish between, I'm going to talk about the books for a minute. Okay. And I want to distinguish between, there's two kinds of books that were written about the Black Dahlia case. The first type is like Severed. Okay. Severed was written as a fraud. John Gilmore knew it was a fraud going into it. He wrote it. It's 25% mistakes and 50% fiction. For a long time, this was the only book that really was out there, and people assumed that it was accurate. It's not. It's totally made up. Since John Gilmore died, I have the idea that the publisher is going to go back and try to fix some of John Gilmore's worst lies. But there is this kind of book. Okay, it was written as a fraud. It was written as a lie. John Gilmore deliberately faked stuff. Okay, that's why you should stay away from this book. You'll just have to unlearn everything. Okay, another book like that, also written as a fraud, is this book. Okay, this was a little bit more sophisticated in that Don Wolfe, who I met and who ripped me off, the stinker, but he's dead now, so it's okay. Don Wolfe got access to Voxy. We're talking about you, Voxy. So what Don Wolfe did was he faked a document. I did I did about a month and a half of blog entries on this book and why it is so bad. Okay. Again, you cannot trust anything in this book. Don't read it. You'll have to unlearn everything. And what is it about? Don Wolfe claims that, get this, Norman Chandler, publisher of the LA Times, and Bugsy Siegel killed Elizabeth Short. It's like, no, that's ridiculous. Okay. So you have this kind of book. Okay. They're written as frauds. They are fake from the get-go. They were written as frauds. They were written as fakes. Okay. You have another class of books, which is, okay, Childhood Shadows. Mary Pacios, and I consider Mary a friend. I like Mary. Okay. She has written Childhood Shadows. It is written sincerely. It is not written, as far as I know, it's not a scam. It's not a fraud. Okay. She sincerely believes these things. I consider her a friend, but I will tell you this. Some of the things that Mary Pacios says are impossible. It could not have happened. However well-intentioned she is, it's just what she says isn't possible. It couldn't happen. Okay. I don't have the book with me. It is one of the more infamous ones. Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer, by Janice Knowlton and Michael Newton. Okay. You've got two people here, and they're kind of like pulling in two directions. Janice Knowlton definitely believed that her dad killed the Black Dahlia. She used to leave me phone messages about her dad, George, and all the terrible things that he did. Did she believe it? Yeah, she believed it. Does that make it true? No. And I think Michael Newton is something of an established true crime writer. I think he makes an effort to be somewhat accurate. He will say things in there that are impossible, but I don't think the book was written as necessarily as a fraud. Okay. That brings us to Black Dahlia Avenger. Okay. I think Steve Hodel wrote this as a fraud. He wrote it in total secrecy. He didn't tell anybody what he was working on. He never asked to see his dad's LAPD file. Was his dad a suspect? Yeah. Okay. I think that Steve originally wrote this as a scam, knowing that it was false. I think that since then, Steve has created an entire alternative universe. He's got this entire alternative reality where, pardon me, he's created this alternative reality where his dad was this super genius, jet set serial killer who flew around the world committing all kinds of crimes that are either unsolved or attributed to other people. He believes it now. I think he began knowing that it was a fraud, and I think he's talked himself into believing his own nonsense, which is pretty sad. But that's kind of that. While we're on the subject of books, let me talk about, two others. What do these books have in common? Okay, these are self-published books by disgruntled ex-employees. Okay, Thicker and Thieves. Be very careful of this book. And Vince Carter's LAPD Road Cops, Cop Hands in the Cookie Jar, all that kind of stuff. Okay. This one, it has a lot more. Okay. Thicker and Thieves has a lot more credence. This I bought in a, check the price, $2. Now, oops. Wait a minute. Now highly collectible. What did I pay for this thing? Bought it in Salvation Army for $2. Okay. This is now a super collectible book with the dust jacket. Okay. People like to go, well, what about Brenda Allen? Okay. This is my thing about Brenda Allen. Did Brenda Allen kill anybody? No. Was she suspected of killing anybody? No. Who was she? She was the Hollywood madam. Yeah. Okay. But she was never suspected of killing anybody. Was she investigated by the homicide division? No. Then F off with, don't give me the Brenda Allen stuff. Okay. That has absolutely nothing to do with the Black Dahlia case, with the homicide division, nothing like that. Go away. Okay. That leaves us with this book. And this is where the story about the four guys, somebody sent me a question about the four guys in the Mercedes. Okay, that's in here. Okay. That comes from Vince Carter's book. It is a self-published book. And it's loaded with mistakes, but okay. Four guys in a Mercedes after World War II. Okay. What was World War II? Well, that was where America was fighting Japan and Germany. Okay. Who made Mercedes? Is that a German car? Yeah. You think people are going to be zipping around Los Angeles in a German car after World War II? No, that doesn't make sense. As a matter of fact, if you go through, and I have done this because I'm me, if you go through the old papers and search the classified ads for cars for sale, you can't even find a Mercedes that was for sale. None of them were for sale. You can't find one. It's like, no, there's just on the face of it. No, that's didn't happen. Okay. Okay. P.U. Eatwell. Okay. P.U. Eatwell had access to these files. Okay. if you go through these files, all of them, and read all of them, you will see that Leslie Dillon was absolutely exonerated. Okay. Who is Leslie Dillon? Leslie Dillon is a whole long story about the police psychiatrist, a guy named Paul DeRiver, got the idea that Leslie Dillon had a split personality, and under this other personality killed Elizabeth Short. Split personalities were a big deal in the 40s. So did that really happen? No. They spent a ton of time investigating Leslie Dillon. He was in San Francisco. He wasn't in LA at the time. He didn't have a connection to Elizabeth Short. He didn't have a connection to a Mark Hansen. And so to the extent that P.U.E. just fabricated all of that, or I would say she ignored all of that. And if you look at P.U.E. Will's book, Black Dahlia, Red Rose, you will see that it's dedicated to a guy named Donald Freed. Okay, who's Donald Freed? Donald Freed is a very nice guy. I interviewed him, and he told me a story. And it's like, well, he told me, Donald Freed essentially told me the same story that he told P.U.E. Well, except being a journalist, I checked it out. I looked at it and all this stuff, and finally I got access to these files, and it's like, no, he was in San Francisco. It's just it's a nothing. And P.U.E. got a book out of it, So what can I say? All right, let me go back to. It's an emailed question from Andre. Okay, Andre, I got one of these questions left over. Is it true that Elizabeth Short was obsessed with the Suzanne Degnan case and that she went to Chicago because of this case? All right. Who is Suzanne Degnan? Suzanne Degnan was a little girl in Chicago who was kidnapped and murdered a year before Elizabeth Short, January about 1946. And it was a sensational case. They found her cut up and in various storm drains in the storm sewers in the Chicago neighborhood. And it was, I think the arms were one place, and the legs and the torso was one place, and all that kind of thing. Okay. And it was a sensational case. It was a huge case. It was on the front page, big banner headlines. Anyway, eventually a guy was arrested for that. He was a young man named William Hirons. And I don't really want to get diverted into the William Hirons case too much, the Suzanne Degnan, but that's who Suzanne Degnan was. Okay, where does Elizabeth Short come into that? Okay, in the summer of 1946, Elizabeth Short left Medford and came to Los Angeles. And she stopped in, number one, Indianapolis, number two, in Chicago, and then went to Long Beach. Hello, Little Miss T.J. Baha. She went to Long Beach for a while, and then she and her beau of the time came to Hollywood. And then he said goodbye, and she stayed in Hollywood. Okay. So about the time Elizabeth Short was in Chicago in the summer of 46, that's about the time William Hirons was. Serge, that's absolute bullshit. No. Sorry. No. It's one of those things where everybody knew Elizabeth Short. No. Anyway, getting back to Suzanne Degnan. So everybody, William Hirons had just gotten arrested. So it was a huge deal. It was a sensational case. And yeah, I mean, everybody knew about it. Elizabeth Short came to Long Beach, came to Los Angeles, and that was that. Now, where does Suzanne Degnan come into the Black Dahlia case? First of all, did she go back to Chicago to investigate the case? No, that's made up. That is, and Steve Hodel will tell you it's in here. No, it's not. Steve Hodel relies on most people don't have this. It's like, no, it's not there. Why Suzanne Degnan? Okay, there was this guy who was a total nut job, and his website. He used to write to me under the name Jack Pico, and he used a mail drop in San Diego. Okay, his name was not Jack Pico. He was a guy who he would look at the crackpot mail, and there was a lot of crackpot mail to the police and the newspapers after Elizabeth Short was killed, and he sort of found patterns. And on one of these postcards that was mailed in, he got the idea that Elizabeth Short's, this is going to sound familiar, Jack Pico or Ron, I think his name was Ron something. Anyway, he got the idea that Elizabeth Short's body was left on Norton Avenue as a pointer to Degnan, which is a couple of blocks away, and the Suzanne Degnan killing. And so he derived all this. He came up with this whole idea that, yeah, there's a Hollywood street near Suzanne Degnan's house, and there Elizabeth Short's body was left near Degnan, and they're somehow related. No. And if that sounds familiar, it's because Steve Hodel stole that idea, as stupid as it is, and came up with, oh yeah. And Steve Hodel has gotten to the point where he says, yeah, Elizabeth Short's body was left, he'll say, her body was left off Degnan. No, it was on Norton. It was blocks away. It had absolutely nothing to do with it except for this sort of weird, I call it map torture. And that's where it comes from. No, absolutely not. Okay, so let me go back here and get some of these. Let's see. Is there a source book you would recommend just for the basics of the case? I always recommend the original news stories from 1947. Go back and find them from like January, February in there. It will give you the basics of the case. After that, the facts kind of start to get distorted, but that is what I would recommend. Okay, so that's that. Okay, this is one of the email questions. Would you like to see a TV series on Elizabeth Short made, more about her life, not much about her death? No, I would not. And why not? Because knowing Hollywood, I mean, we are a company town, and what people would want is a snuff film. And that is why I never, ever want to see a movie made about Elizabeth Short or a TV series or anything like that. People would turn it into a snuff film. I guarantee it. That's how it would happen. That's what would happen. Okay. Jeffrey, did the Bailey family ever acknowledge remembering the crime? Didn't the police extensively knock on doors on South Norton? Yes and no. Okay. By the time I got to investigating the Black Dahlia case, I started my research in 1996, and my story ran for the 50th anniversary in 1997. Subsequently, I started doing more research. By that point, the various members of the Bailey family were really not available. Walter Bailey wasn't, his wife wasn't. They were both deceased. I did locate some of the kids, and I did locate the daughter, and she was very adamant that she did not live in Los Angeles at the time. She did not know anything about the Black Dahlia case. She was never told about it. It was never discussed, et cetera, et cetera. So that was what a family member told me. Did the police extensively knock on doors on South Norton? Oh, yeah. Not only did the police door knock on South Norton, they blanketed that neighborhood, the crime scene, in blocks and blocks in every direction. And the Police Historical Society, the Police Museum, had a display of some of the Black Dahlia stuff. Nothing really helpful, but and one of the things was a list of the addresses where they had knocked on doors. And they were way over on the other side of Crenshaw, knocking on doors. So yeah, they did extensively door knock, and apparently didn't find anything. But Jeffrey, that's the answer to that question. Okay, let's go down a little bit further here. Let's see. Oh, this is from Little Miss TJ Baja. See, I don't forget. I've read stories on Elizabeth and a jealous boyfriend that scratched up her arms in San Diego. Yeah, that was, I think the story goes something like this. She showed scratches on her arm that she said were from a jealous boyfriend. Whether whether they were actually from the jealous boyfriend or she had done it herself, that's an open question. Um, and I should point out Elizabeth Short chewed her fingernails, and so I'm not sure she would have been able to scratch herself. But there was some question as to whether that actually happened, or she had kind of fabricated it. Um, that that's the best of my knowledge on that. Andre, as I said, I don't know. That's the only information I have on the envelope. I was not allowed to look into the file cabinet and see what they still had in there. I don't know. Okay, another one. Live question. There's a recent story claiming Elizabeth Short frequented a bar grill hotel in San Bernardino. Then there's the bogus story about her smoking marijuana up there too. Did you visit the area? Okay. Elizabeth Short went to the Sycamore Inn, which is in Rancho Cucamonga. She did do that. She went there on a date. So that is true. It's a nice place. It's still there. But that is the only place that I know of out even toward the Inland Empire anywhere is the Sycamore Inn. Beyond that, no. Otherwise, she tended to stay in Hollywood. Or there are some car trips where she went up to like Camarillo, Ventura, places like that. But otherwise, no. She didn't really get to the Inland Empire past. And the Sycamore Inn, I don't think really qualifies as the Inland Empire, but that's the furthest inland she got. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Was the removal of Elizabeth Short's rose tattoo on her leg done in a surgical manner and or with surgical tools? Well, I don't think there's any surgical way to cut a big chunk out of somebody's leg. Was it done professionally? Yeah. I mean, there's no surgical procedure where you do that. But was it done in a clean professional manner? Yeah. And, for people who are interested in what was done to Elizabeth Short, I would strongly suggest watch YouTube videos. If you want to know how that sort of thing is done, go to YouTube. Watch videos of guys, butchering hogs or dressing game. They're easy to find, and you will see that these guys are really, really good with knives. They really know the animal's anatomy. They're good at it. And for that matter, if you're a fan of Dr. Pimple Popper, go watch some of Dr. Sandra Lee, because it's right there on the camera. Here she goes into this, cyst or whatever. And you can see just what it's like to cut open skin. That will give you some sort of baseline information of what was done and how someone who is skilled with those kind of instruments works. And I would recommend it for that. Find out, do some research. Okay, let's see here. Let me scroll down here to the live questions. B asks, which reporters were first on the scene? Was it Aggie Underwood? And what was the Los Angeles Times coverage of the case? Okay, that's actually two questions. I don't have the book out here. It's Will Fowler's Reporters. Okay. Will Fowler, I considered him a friend, and he lied to me all over the place. It's in Will Fowler's Reporters that he was the first, and he told me the story. He was the first reporter on the crime scene, and the cops showed up and they pulled their gun on him, all that stuff. Okay, no. I interviewed the first cop on the scene. He said, "What are you talking about?" It's like, no. Will made all of that up. He was not the first reporter on the crime scene. So this is Will's story. He was the first reporter on the crime scene. He went down and filed the story, and then went back to the crime scene to fool the competition, in his words. No, that didn't happen. None of that happened. That he is in photographs at the crime scene. At the very end, he's standing on the sidewalk. But no, he was not the first one. Who were the first? Possibly, Agnes Underwood. But remember, in those days, a couple of things about reporting in those days. First of all, reporters and photographers traveled in a team. Agnes Underwood of the Los Angeles Herald-Express always traveled with a photographer on a story. And the photographer in this case was Perry Fowler. They, no relation to Will Fowler. Perry Fowler and Agnes Underwood worked together frequently. Okay. So Agnes Underwood and Perry Fowler go to the crime scene on South Norton Avenue. And you can see her from the back in pictures. Aggie Underwood's very distinctive. And when you see the pictures of her standing, and she's standing in the street or on the sidewalk, she's not up in proximity to the body because the police are keeping them back. But she was one of the first. Another one was Sid Hughes of the Los Angeles Examiner. And Will would always get furious when I said, well, Sid Hughes was there. Oh, no. Sid Hughes' career was in the crapper by that time. It's like, well, no. No, Sid Hughes was there. We can see him in the photographs. You have a lot of reporters there. There was a guy from the Los Angeles Times. His name was Marvin Miles. He was, pardon me, Marvin Miles was the aviation correspondent for the Los Angeles Times. What he was doing at the Black Dahlia crime scene, I don't know, but he was also there. What was the Los Angeles Times coverage of the case? Okay. The Los Angeles Times was very squeamish about crime. So of all the Los Angeles papers, and there were 4 major papers competing at that time. The morning papers were the Examiner and the Times, and the afternoon papers were the Herald Express, and then the Daily News, which in no relation to the current Daily News, they published all day. So you got those 4 papers. And so of those 4 papers, the LA Times was the most squeamish about crime. They never put the Black Dahlia case on the front page. They were afraid of offending their readers. So no, the Examiner had it on the front page every day. The Herald Express had it on the front page every day. The Daily News had it on the front page every day. The LA Times, no, inside, except for twice. Twice in the entire history of the LA Times did the Black Dahlia make the cover. The first time was when they arrested Joseph Dumais and they thought he had done it. And the second time was me. When my anniversary story ran in January of '97, I made the front page for only the second time in the LA Times history. So that was the LA Times coverage. Okay, let me go down to one of the, let's see here. Let's see. Okay, this is a Walter Bailey question. What was Walter Bailey's motive for killing Elizabeth Short? And you know what? This is my answer. You will find, much to your surprise, that when you go into a jury trial, the prosecutor will say, and it's in Vincent Bugliosi's opening statement in Tate LaBianca, the Manson trial. And I posted it online, Vincent Bugliosi's opening statement. It is well written. It's very well done. But he will tell the jury right off from the beginning, I don't have to give you a motive. The rules of courtroom procedure, the rules of evidence is, I don't have to provide you with a motive. If I can, I will, but I don't have to. And he came up with Helter Skelter. But the reality is, in courtroom procedure, you don't have to provide a motive. You don't have to do that. No. And so we can speculate if someone like Walter Bailey were to kill Elizabeth Short, maybe this is why he did it. But I'm always kind of wary of that because, if in a courtroom trial, the prosecutor doesn't have to provide a motive. Again, it's a strong argument, but it's like, I'll do the same thing. It's like, well, maybe this, maybe that. But the motive is kind of secondary. And people will be disappointed. Oh, Harnisch, you're weaning out. But I mean, that's the reality of courtroom procedure. Okay, let's see. Let me go back here. Nope, Pew Eatwell. Okay. First on the crime scene. Yeah, maybe Van Doren, that's BS. Yeah. Oh, PUEL focus. Oh, yeah, that's the Astra Motel. No, they investigated the hell out of the Astra Motel. No, no. They investigated that. Again, it's in here. They they looked at all of that. They did. They they would tear up the baseboards. One of the things the crime labs would do is they would tear up the baseboards and look for traces of blood, and they didn't find any. And they also did that with Mark Hansen. Uh, Later on, Mark Hansen managed to get himself shot for reasons that I won't get into now. But this woman named Lola Titus, or calling herself Lola, shot Mark Hansen. And so they used that opportunity to go into Mark Hansen's house and tear up the baseboards and search for blood, and they didn't find any. So, no, Linda, the whole thing about the Astor Motel, nah, none of that's true. Not at all. Um, okay, so let's scroll down here some more. Oh, okay. Hi, Larry. Your thoughts on the Betty Short VJ or VE day footage? I don't buy it. Million to one shot. Okay. No. What am I talking about? Way back when Steve Hodel was just getting going, he was on a show called 48 Hours. And they located some stock footage of VJ Day. That was the celebration of the end of World War II. VJ is victory over Japan. And it was right after when the atomic bomb was dropped. What happened was we dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the Japanese surrendered. Okay. And so that was the big, VJ Day was the big celebration. And there is stock footage of random people celebrating VJ Day on Hollywood Boulevard. And to their kind of sort of credit, 48 Hours said, well, we can't be sure that this is Elizabeth Short, but what it looks like her, maybe kind of, we'd like it to be Elizabeth Short. Well, over the years, you know, people have watched that footage over and over again, and they kind of talked themselves into that being Elizabeth Short. Okay. When was VJ Day? August 1945. Okay. Where was Elizabeth Short in August of 1945? She was in Medford. How do we know that? Because her fiance, Matt Gordon, died in August of 45 in a plane crash. And his mom sent a telegram to Elizabeth Short in Medford telling her that he was dead. So we know absolutely without question that Elizabeth Short was not in Los Angeles, wasn't in California, was nowhere around. She was in Medford. So is it her? No. Could it be her? No, it isn't. But it is an interesting kind of reflection on human behavior that people will themselves into believing that that's Elizabeth Short. It is not. It can't be. So there you go. Let's see. Could she drive a car? Who is she? Elizabeth Short? I don't think so. Don't know. Is that? Are the newspaper archives digitized? Are they available online? Okay. Yes and no. If you're looking at the Los Angeles newspaper archives, the LA Times is available through ProQuest. It is, again, they were the least interested in covering true crime, or pardon me, they were the least interested in covering crime, so they never had the story out front. They never went after it like the Examiner did. The Examiner is not online anywhere. The Herald Express, I'm told, was being digitized very slowly by the Los Angeles Public Library under some sort of grant from the Hearst Corporation. I don't think it's online. I'm not aware of it. What is online is the Daily News. And if you subscribe to newspapers.com, you can now get the Los Angeles Daily News. Again, no relation at all to the current LA Daily News. It was a different paper. Beyond that, there are lots of other newspapers that are online. If you go to newspapers.com, or if you don't want to subscribe to that, various library, if you check your local public library, see if they have ProQuest or Archives of American Papers, because the wire services filed stories. You will see stories maybe from Associated Press. Maybe you'll see stories from United Press. Maybe you'll see stories from INS, which is the International News Service, which was Hearst's wire service. So if you see an INS story, it's probably going to be summarized and taken from what was in the Examiner or the Herald Express, because those were Hearst papers, maybe. But beyond that, your best bet is to look for wire stories. And I hesitate to tell you this because you have to be very, very careful with the FBI files. You can get a lot of wrong ideas in there. There's a lot of material that is just like you really need to be like, no, this isn't true. But if you only don't look at any of the interviews, don't look at anything else, just read the newspaper articles that are in the FBI file. There are some of the Examiner papers in there, articles in there, but do not read any of the interviews. Especially do not read, and I'm like, oh, the forbidden fruit, Peter Vetcher. That interview, what he claims, what Peter Vetcher claims, totally false. He totally made that up, which did not stop it from being a basis for a graphic novel in France. They love the story. Not true, but hey, okay. Let's see here. What have we got? Okay. Did the police save Elizabeth Short's love letters, photos, possessions? Did they lose most of it over time? This is kind of the same one. All right. Yes and no. Some material in theory would have been returned to the family if the police no longer needed it, or if it was no longer of use. For example, first of all, there wasn't a lot of evidence. Elizabeth Short was found, naked. They never found her clothes. They think they found her purse. They think they found her shoes, and that's it. They recovered her luggage because she checked it at the bus station, so they had that. And she also had a trunk that was at the Railway Express office. They had that. And what happened to that material after the police were done with it? Most likely it was returned to the family. Now, in the luggage were her photo albums. And so there was a massive feeding frenzy over the photographs in her albums. They were torn to pieces. Some of them were taken by the police. Some of them were taken by newspapers, news photographers, and some of the photographs from the scrapbooks ended up in the ended up in the archives of, let's say, the Examiner, one of the papers, and were sold at a flea market sale to a guy who recognized what they were. He put them on eBay, and they were bought by Steve Hodel. So Steve Hodel has some photographs from Elizabeth Short's scrapbook. And the reason I publicized it, because I had that, is so he couldn't come back and say, hey, my dad had actual authenticated photographs from Elizabeth Short's scrapbook, because that's the kind of sleazy operation that Steve Hodel runs. He is perfectly capable of producing the stuff that he bought on eBay and saying, hey, this was in my dad's stuff. So I kept him from doing that. You cannot imagine, if you don't know the Black Dahlia case, you cannot imagine how much Steve Hodel lies and misrepresents. It's shocking. So that was kind of my response to that. Okay, let's see. Helen, do you think Elizabeth Short perhaps bipolar and therefore incapable of high function? Helen, we don't know. She didn't do well in school. She didn't get very good grades. But when you read her letters, and I have every reason to believe that her letters are authentic, and I've never seen photographs of her, the original letters, just the transcriptions in the newspapers. She expresses herself very well in written. She's very good at that. And, for somebody who was a high school dropout and didn't get great grades, it's pretty remarkable. She expresses herself very well. And so in terms of her intellect, I would say she was probably of at least average intelligence, maybe above. I think she had emotional problems that kind of blocked some of her decision making. But in terms of just intellect, I think she was, I think she was pretty smart, or at least average. Average intelligence. Okay, let's see. Let me scroll down here again. Okay. Let's see. This is a long one. Speaking of morgue shots, I know from your website you don't like discussing them, but I think if we want to understand the killer's psychopathy, there's no getting around them. Some time ago, I listened to the interview with Mark Sjostrom. You mentioned on your first Ask Me Anything, he was very coy about control questions, but did say that Ann Toth knew at least one of them. Possibly she was given that information by Harry Hansen to upset her and get her to spill the beans on Mark Hansen, assuming there were any beans to be spilled. Sjostrom also mentioned, as I recall, that he tracked down the photographer, the crime scene and/or morgue shots, and was able to get sharper copies from the original negatives, from which he'd be able to discern details not mentioned in the autopsy report. Do you think there could be anything there, or just attention-seeking nonsense? Okay, well, that's a whole bunch of questions thrown together. Let me take a running start. There were 3 control questions as far as I know. Whether Harry Hansen told them to Ann Toth, I don't know. Mark Sjostrom was very generous with me when I was doing research back in the 90s. He gave me a long summary of his conversations with Ann Toth. Who is Ann Toth? Ann Toth was Elizabeth Short's roommate at Mark Hansen's house. She actually was an actress. She actually did have some little extra parts and stuff like that. She did. And there are also photographs of her doing like acting, training for, movement for acting and that kind of stuff, which Elizabeth Short never did any of that. She never studied movement. She never studied diction. Ann Toth did all of that sort of thing. Anyway, in terms of what Harry Hansen would tell her, there's no way to know. Harry Hansen probably, one of the things I think Mark said that he shared with me was Harry Hansen volunteered to get her a gun for self-protection, and she thought that was weird. That was actually somewhat standard. Agnes Underwood I think her house got burglarized or something like that, and Jack Donahoe, who was head of homicide at the time, got her a gun. And so, yeah, at that time, homicide detectives handing out guns to women, that was a thing, believe it or not. Yeah. So now, photos of the crime scene. The actual authentic LAPD crime scene photos are small, okay? They're about the size of an index card. They are not 8x10s or 5x7s. They're little. And you can tell them because in the corner of every photograph, you will see the reporting number. You'll see the date that it was taken. You will see the DR reporting number, and you will see GL. Okay, GL are the initials of the photographer. That's how you distinguish the LAPD photographs. If it doesn't have that, it's not an LAPD photograph. It's either a news photo or something like that. Now, if you get a hold of one of the original LAPD photographs, Gilbert Warson, who was he's the guy in the crime scene with the camera photographing it for the LAPD. He used a large format camera. In fact, all of the reporters, or all of the photographers at the crime scene used large format cameras, 5x7, speed graphic. Pardon me, not 5x7, 3x5, or 4x5. They used the 4x5 large format speed graphics. That was the standard camera. So when you get a negative, or when you get a contact print, and a contact print is where you just take the negative and put it on a piece of photographic paper and boom, photograph it, expose it. Very often you can enlarge those things tremendously, way beyond what you see on the little photograph that's at the crime scene. There's a lot of detail on those large format cameras, and you can blow them up really big, and you can see a lot. But what I have no idea what Mark Sjostrom had access to, but that is the story on the crime scene photographs. They are, if you get an original, they're very detailed. You blow that up, you scan it, you blow it up, and you can see a lot. Okay, I've been doing this for an hour. I'm going to take one more written question and one more live question, and I think that'll do it for this time. Do Elizabeth Short's surviving relatives know about your theory, and do they have any opinions on it? Do they have any theories on their own? The Short, and I have different relationships with different members of the Elizabeth Short's family. I have met one of the sisters. I have been in contact with various nieces and nephews. They have, mostly their reaction is they feel victimized. They are tremendously traumatized by it. As far as they are concerned, the murder and the media frenzy around it destroyed their family. They want it to go away. As far as justice for Elizabeth, what they really want more than anything else is to go away and don't bug me anymore. That's what they want. It is hard for people, especially now with as popular as true crime is, for people to understand why the family, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to get involved with it. What they want is to go away. Go away. That's what they want. And so that is their reaction to anything. And every time some self-promoting author comes around, as far as they're concerned, it's just somebody cashing in on their grief. And when Steve Hodel showed up with his photographs that he said, oh yeah, I found these in my dad's stuff and they're Elizabeth Short. They said, no, it's not, obviously not her. And as far as they are concerned, it's just somebody else cashing in on their tragedy. What they want more than anything else is for it to go away. Okay, one more live question. Did Elizabeth Short have any California jobs beside Camp Cook? No. She worked at Camp Cook, which is now Vandenberg Air Force Base. It was a big Army base. During World War II, there was a lot of training. Army units came in there and they trained. For some of them, they built. It was a very extensive training facility. They actually built a fake town that they could practice invading. So they would do a lot of like physical drills. They do like 20-mile marches and all that kind of stuff. And that's what they did. But what Camp Cook is totally gone. It's wiped out. Even the streets are gone. There is really nothing left of the old days. When you look at there's postcards of it, and you can see what it looked like, and it was pretty primitive. But there's really nothing left of it. As far as any other jobs, no. Once her fiance died in August of 45, Elizabeth Short never worked again. She found out that he was killed. She apparently gave about 2 weeks notice. She was working at a cafe in Massachusetts as a waitress. She gave her 2 weeks notice and never worked again, as far as we know. So no, she never worked in California. Okay, I think that is it for now. We're past 11 o'clock. Okay, this has been fun. The time went past for me. I hope everybody else enjoyed it. I do these on the first Tuesday of the month. So the first Tuesday of August is August 1st. So I will do another one on August 1st, Tuesday, 10 o'clock Pacific time. And thanks everybody. If I didn't get to your question, email me or leave it in the comments. This video will be posted on my YouTube channel, and people can come back and watch it. And until next time, thanks a lot from me and Boxy here. Happy 4th of July, and have a great day, have a great month, and we'll see you in August. Take care. And thanks again for coming by. It's been a pleasure.